The idea for this exhibition probably had its beginnings a lot of years ago when I was in Portland at the Portland Art Museum, and I was getting to know Lexa Walsh, who was getting her MFA in social practice at Portland State University. And Lexa was doing all kinds of things at the museum. She was in residence at the museum in the education department. She was a key participant in a program that I devised, and she deeply participated in, called Shine a Light. And in a lot of conversations while she was dancing and singing and cooking and I was listening and talking, she mentioned that she was a sibling in a family of 15 and that she had a brother, Dan, who was an artist also, and that they had long kind of whispered, imagined, envisioned that they might collaborate one day. I came here, and Lisa and Sonnet and I, in a lot of early kind of freaked out, frantic conversations when there wasn't that much on the schedule here, and we were trying to figure out what we were going to do and how we were going to fill the galleries, kind of dreamt up, I brought up this idea, this like little kernel of an idea, and Lisa said, hey, that's a really interesting idea, and we should do that. And then we invited Dan and Lexa up, and we sat at Tunnel City, and they described this project on a napkin to us. And the project was kind of like, well, we want to make a machine, we want to make an apparatus, we want to make a structure, and the structure is going to be for seeing and imagining and playing with art. I'm doing that badly, but I'm just saying what my memory of it from that early Tunnel City conversation. And Lex and Dan, as you'll hear, have very, very different ways of working, and they have very, very different ways of describing their work. And so a lot of those early conversations were as much about like, what do they mean? And what is one of them says this, but the other one says that? How do we make sense of those two different ideas, those seemingly different ideas that they had? And for a long time, it was really like that. It was really, really unclear and vague, and we had like lots and lots of questions about what it was going to look like and how it was going to play out at all. But it did really, really, really well. And Lexa ended up coming here and making a winter study, and that kind of preceded the show. And they ended up making this incredible thing together that they're now going to talk about. So, Lexa and Dan.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for coming. I'm Lexa Walsh. This is Dan Walsh. And we can't thank the whole WCMA staff enough for supporting this huge, crazy project. I mean, it's been big and long and intense and changing, and it's been such a collaborative process, which has been great for us. So thank you, all of you. This is our family in 1974 and our family in
extended family
in 2008, and it has grown since then. But I think that we can both say that our practices have emerged directly or indirectly from growing up in this family.
I would say that every Walsh I know has a certain competitive, in a large family, you need to work hard to be noticed, and there's a lot of competition, and you want to be heard, and a little bit of a sick work ethic, which all is to our benefit, and as you all know, it turns out to be a good thing long term. But full of love and support, even though some people, my dad was a bit surprised, as my mom said, but it's a perfectly good environment to become an artist in.
So we'll move fast forward to 20-some years later. I went to California College of the Arts, got a degree in ceramic sculpture with Viola Fry, made monumental sculpture, and then I didn't have a studio anymore when I graduated. So I started making sculpture with found objects. I was interested in the imagined stories of these objects. In the front here, you'll see a collection of found socks that I made a sort of idea of a dating service for by embedding them in beeswax and making them these kind of seductive objects and photographing them in these kind of sexy ways. And continuing my sculptural practice, this found styrofoam, things like that. So, I was working as a sculptor for a while.
I was at Philadelphia College of Art, which is now called UArts, and then I went to City University, Hunter College for grad school, thinking I would be a teacher. Got hooked on New York, and about 8 years later, as I was trying to digest art history, I was painting. I slowly worked my way into a more of a minimalist vein, and I think I found, I felt like I zeroed in on my sensibility. A model of painting, Peter Halley would have been in my mind at the time. I joked that it was Philip Guston painting an Agnes Martin. The one thing about minimalism is maybe you know about the idea, the concept of hot and cool information. With the cool minimalist approach, I found that what struck me as interesting, they always spoke of the object as something real, and there was no expression. But I always felt the cool minimalist object begged for interpretation. The less that was there, the more it became a mirror or something like this. And introduced psychology and proposed some kind of psychological read. I thought that really made a lot of sense to me. So although I was making models and dotted lines, I like the neutrality one might project onto this. Going further in that projection, or a theme I will use tonight is use value. This is like an agenda. How can painting be useful? Like the idea of display might interest me at the time, but also have a relationship with history in the minimalist grid. So you can see, rather than a perfect grid, I cropped it in certain ways, and it lends itself to application, to use, a sign of use.
Instead of talking about art right now, I'm going to talk about another huge influence in my life, which was living at this anarchist collective in Czech Republic for 8 years, which was an international art center.
That was anarchist?
Yes. We did a lot of incredibly radical curatorial projects there, inviting artists from around the world to collaborate. So that, mixed with also being in a toy instrument ensemble that I started, collaborating musically, collaborating with performance, all of these things really influenced my idea about like getting rid of the solo artist idea and what happens when we as a group generate community and generate creativity and just generate action together. So although I wrote this manifesto/contract later on, I'd say that this is kind of sums up my practice from then on. In a space, we are equals, we are all students and teachers, we collaborate, we share with trust, we listen with openness, we disagree with respect, and we break the rules when necessary, and we know failure is always an option.
My first opportunity, which is so relevant to tonight and what we've done, this is an example of my first quote-unquote installation or intervention. This was at a very small gallery on Spring and Lafayette in New York City, and it's called Vista. Again, this idea of projection, Vista, this would be a rail. With minimal art, you choose well, you can make a notation, you can refer to things without committing to the reality of them and keep it abstract, keep the thinking abstract. I know it's not much, it's a really small space, but this is a big deal for me at the time that it wasn't just painting that I could not express myself, but to do maybe do research into other ways of making art besides the painting. And later, in retrospect, I would say it was a way of keeping the painting more of a pure pursuit, and the installations could go their own way, and I could find there could be any solution. It didn't have to fall into my style. So this is a very big diptych. Again, you'll be seeing kind of important things from us today, I guess, but you can see this idea of application or use value. There's 25, albeit abstract, 25 shelf units on the left and 25 squares on the right. It's kind of do-it-yourself. It's a bit didactic, but programmatic. But what you give away in the austere part, you get back in fun and participation.
So I had the opportunity in 2003 to do a project in Belgrade, Serbia, and this was after living in Czech Republic for all those years and really becoming just changing my outlook about what it means to be an artist and a maker today. And I did my first, what I would call my first socially engaged project, which was called the Immortalization Project, where I, instead of imagining the histories of these found objects, I interviewed people about what the histories actually were. And I ended up doing this project in Serbia, in Taiwan, in Denmark, in Oakland, and then dealt with it in various different ways, including making postcards for the towns that these places were in, or in Taiwan, making large-scale installations, and also calling cards that instead of having the your business information, it had the information about your most precious object. So this was, this, and when I look back at this, tons of people have done this kind of work now, but this was a really important step for me to like dealing with the social and what does the act of communion and conversation, where's that in the picture as the artwork? And that led to so many other works that were thinking about what tools can I use and things that I'm good at. I'm good at talking to people. I'm good at coming in a crowd and making a song or cooking a meal. So how can I use these tools to bring people together? So I started a jingle writing project for creating a sense of identity for different places. This is with a group of students in Denmark, and used song, cheer, dance, food, whatever was necessary to get people together, get them concentrating on what it means to have a facilitated time together and concentration.
This would have been my second or third installation called Seven Grays. It was conceived of the summer before 9/11 and made that next January 2002. I had this idea, a structural idea, a way of looking at information, which relates to the grid, is to put the different parts under exactly same conditions. It's very scientific in a way. And you look at, and you're able to see differences more clearly. So I had this idea for 7 grays, and the 7 is because you can see the ceiling, it's cast concrete, and that divided very nicely into 7 like alleys. And so I manufactured, found, or made with different mediums like shadow, green, red, blue dots, neon lights with scrim over them, or yarn, 6 different colors of yarn that would make a gray that I got from a computer screen, and I isolated them in these bays. And you would, very directional, didactic, but you can see I put lines on the ground where you're supposed to stand and analyze. It would have been about here to the wall. And you would look, and you could walk in and look at them too, and the idea of judgment, I'm trying to, in this case, I'd be trying to isolate the act of judgment, the act of looking, that it's meaningful, that it might be symbolic. And something playful might be the cinder blocks, but that's all a white pegboard to give it more of this clinical feel. So this was a blast of a show for me. And then behind, I thought that was had such a scientific feel. I had it. So that would be one of the bays. That front board, that white board there, is set forward to so that's 7 by 7 feet. But it was set forward to allow the light to fall evenly on each example. If it were back, it would have made it cast a shadow on it. So you can see the steps in. So it's really narrowing down, calling attention to the analysis side of it. And then behind that, I invited a bunch of artists, and I curated the show. I made quite a bit of the own work, but of my own work for the show. But I also commissioned quite a few works. I told people exactly what I wanted from them. Like my buddy. Do you notice a line of thought here, a line of control? But for instance, that's a riff off of the Pink Floyd Dark Side of the Moon. See that upper right? That's my buddy Michael Rhodes, he's from Newcastle, lives in Berlin. But it's so very playful, analysis. Analysis, judgment, and play. I thought that was a great axis at the time. That would have been 2002. I thought that was a really good way of thinking about art. Judgment and play. Okay, I think that's it for this.
long before I ever read any Boris Groys, I naturally got interested in the idea of multiple authorship. This is a project called Show Me Your Ljubljana, and I invited people in Ljubljana, Slovenia, to send me on journeys that I wouldn't go on myself as a tourist. And they mapped them out for me on these tourism maps. And I went on various journeys, got lost on most of them, had adventures, came back and wrote about them, and then created an alternative tourism bureau in front of the real one in the old square, where it's funny because somebody came up to me and said, "Are you going to be nicer to us than the people inside there?" But through this collective authorship, we were able to create these experiences for me and then for the next person to then take this map and go experience and perhaps get lost and combine and convolute.
Well, the judgment and play. I went through this phase where I thought the painting was. I no longer thought of the dynamic outside world. I thought of a repetition. Of course, I had occupied the grid along the way, but I thought of things on display, passive, maybe a little bit overcooked in the past. I had done a lot of this kind of painting. Here's maybe a year later would be, I thought of ways, so how, I'm starting to really get back into the grid and consistent grid. How can I not make content, but how can I show the differences? So I started making a lot of these diptychs. This is quite a big painting, about 72 square each panel. And the idea might be is to tweak differences between the panels, and have people look and compare. Like I said, have people look at. By the way, I've been making books by that time. I'm looking at pages and compare and contrast.
At age 41, I decided to go to graduate school. The worst financial decision I ever made in my life, but a very good decision otherwise. And I had a studio visit with Mel Ziegler, who's a wonderful artist, and he said that I was really kind of accessorizing my work with the objects and ephemera, and what would it be like if I were to just bear all that stuff down and just really do experiential work and to try that, what would happen if I tried that out. So I made a goal to do that for a year, to make object-free work, which ended up being 5 years. But and now I feel like an event planner, so I'm really excited to go back into the object. But my first experiment was with that, and I'm obviously not shy. And I was a cheerleader up and through 8th grade. Brendan, wasn't I your mascot in high school? So I did a project called Dial a Cheer. And people could call a hotline if they needed to be cheered up, and I'd make a cheer on the spot for them and send them the video back. So sometimes I was in my bathrobe or wherever I was, I would make this cheer for them. And it was really interesting to like play with the idea of generosity, but also to play with the idea of like, what does it mean for a 41-year-old woman to act like a cheerleader and desexualize herself specifically for that role. Here's me in progress. And I also worked with cheerleading at Portland Art Museum and brought a professional cheerleader in, and we made cheers for artworks that needed cheering up. And that was working with a professional cheerleader was really different because I got to really like dig into the research of what it means to be a cheerleader now versus in Catholic school in 1977. Different story entirely.
So this would have been another installation. This is in Delme, France, which is just below Luxembourg in the northeast corner. This is a synagogue that turned into a experimental art space. So you can see I'm continuing with very much of an awareness of looking and analyzing. In this case, it's a blue-red scenario, which is, I guess, not a coincidence that we see that kind of thing upstairs. But again, analysis and play. So I'm trying to keep you up on all the installations I've done over the years. This is by this time the painting had been developing into been starting to use really big brushes and a bit more of a grand gesture and a little more zen. All of a sudden it was taking a lot longer to make one line, but these really big brushes, and I just started to get into these perfect movements, and the texture would be very particular. That all these things would make transparent layers, and it would look right and good, and have all of a sudden process was of interest. So here would be this was a popular painting at the time. Here would be a fade. What I call a fade. What do you call it? Aloha?
Ombre.
Ombre. So this would be painted yellow. So now I got really into economy. This would be yellow base and then red on top of that painted. And this is a theme I would have used many times. And then the blue, for instance, as I'm painting down each row, I'd add a half a cup of water. And so it would just fade and go away. So over just a few years, I'm all of a sudden really interested in brushes and technique and making great economical decisions to maximal effects. So the minimalist turned maximalist.
So as Tina told you, I worked with her at Portland Art Museum, and that was an amazing opportunity to play with museum interpretation and museum education, but not be working for the museum. So I had a lot of, even though Portland Art Museum is pretty uptight, I had a lot of freedom because I was not working for the museum per se. And I was interested in how can you bring people into the museum who don't want to be there? How can you make the museum an unexpected event and a place of making and activity and dialogue and fun, adventure, all of these things. So I did a ton of projects, which I can't go over all of them, but one of them was a series of songs for artworks. I joined with some local musicians, and we wrote songs and gave a tour of the artworks in song. So instead of a regular docent tour, you had a tour in song. And we all know from Schoolhouse Rock that song is very effective, in addition to joyful. I worked through the lens of hair for a lot of projects, doing a tour for families that was designed by hairdressers. I made wigs for artworks in the collection that you could play tableau vivant. Hairdressers came in and gave haircuts. If you wanted to really go deep with your relationship with a work, you could get a haircut of it that they chose. This was also bringing the community into the museum that wouldn't have normally gone in. Those hairdressers were a block away and had never stepped foot in the museum. So this was a relationship building opportunity as well.
Here's another painting. Now I'm thinking more about layers and maybe the slight metamorphosis of if you take this. I'm sure it's apparent there, but if you take this cross and keep going in, again, this is revealing a bit of my math side and geometry side. But it's called nesting. You have a brush mark that is 1 inch wide and 4 inches long, and then the next one's 3/4 wide and 3.5 long, and the next, and then all of a sudden you notice see how the blue starts to pinch and it's no longer what it was. See how it starts to tweak and not be square in between the blue lines. Yeah. So all these things, this commitment to, or relative commitment to my process, were all of a sudden and care in the layout and the development of following the grid carefully. Becoming really interesting. There was, in other words, I was starting to become like one of these process artists where you start something and you don't know what's going to happen at the end. Of course, I'm cheating the management of the colors along the way and making judgments, but all of a sudden I was calling myself a process artist.
This is the beginning of a project called Meal Ticket that I still do to this day. This was at Portland Art Museum, and again, using something that I'm good at that is almost a no-brainer, a meal, a free, delicious meal. What can a free, delicious meal do to bring people together? I did this because I noticed that there were a lot of silos that needed to be busted at the Portland Art Museum. So I did a monthly meal for the staff called Meal Ticket, and we did it in the boardroom that was usually reserved just for upper management, and it was replete with wine glasses, even though we weren't allowed to serve alcohol. And I made a nice luncheon, sat people cross-departmentally. So there'd be a security guard across from somebody from education, curator across from somebody from events, and so on. We'd do a recipe exchange, and that recipe exchange then ended up being a community cookbook. I should also add that I had a uniform for my entire year and a half there. I wanted to be artist as service worker, and and I had a designer, Adam Arnold, make me this fabulous airline hostess-ish uniform. So here's an image from all of the meals and the nicely designed cookbook by Justin Flood, who's a local Portland person. And this is also really playing on the idea of a docent cookbook, but instead it was, taking account of and valuing the laborers of the museum. And they have really great recipes, by the way, those Portlanders.
This is an installation called Time Trials. It originated in this gallery said, hey, you can do whatever you want. We're in support in Amsterdam. And I, after much thought and chance, I came up with this idea of rather than pure phenomenon, which I'd be normally side with, I came up with this theme of time and what turned out to be timelessness. You can see the Platonic solids there, but there would be like metronomes, but there'd also be cultural time, like maybe I'm sure everyone's familiar with the archaic, the formative, the classical, the post-classical, and the Mannerist, and destruction, things like this. So but to make matters very complicated, I decided to make a lens or a frame to look through or to alter your perception of that subject. So you can see the sepia looking at the time, it sounds a bit cheeky, but looking through sepia lenses at a timeless Platonic solid and so on. The metronome through a hockey mask, the red color through a kaleidoscope. We call it a kaleidoscope, and then the last one there is one of the cameras, which I like so much that I asked for this in this show too. But again, it's about participation, but also a little bit of a surreal or didacticism about it. That when the show opened, the kids were going crazy, running around looking at everything, where the adults were all standing in the corner. They didn't know how to participate in. So here's a.
Did I just hear the word participate come out of your mouth?
But is that not something you heard from me before?
No.
So, for instance, that black box there, it's supposed to look like a pair of binoculars, but it actually forces you to look like this at the two other objects.
So I did meal ticket in many other places. This was with seniors in Florida, and we made a cookbook together. This was with artists and tech workers in Oakland. So the food thing, it continues to go. And now I have, these tools in my backpack that I know work. And I'll say this is like my last big theme that has come up is working with archives. I think that in a way, like making a cookbook is making an archive. And my obsessive tendency to keep things, and that could very well be from growing up in a big family and finding like a need to find my own power and control over things. I'm not sure, but my darling husband will attest to my pack-rattery. It's a very organized pack-rattery, but it is, I have deep nostalgia for the archive. So this is the Oakland Museum's archive of natural history sounds that I turned into a custom toy instrument with the help of a programmer. And this was the first time I'd really joined together like my practice with Toykestra and my art practice. And it was a really exciting thing to take these archive sounds, which are just, some silence and and then I heard this musicality. That's the Western metal arc. Heard this musicality in that, and what happens if you go next thing you know, you have this amazing rhythm, and if you just do a little cut and paste, and you have that rhythm and turn it into a toy instrument that can be played. So playing with a sound archive and turning it into this interactive, learning tool, but also instrument for all ages. It was a really exciting departure.
I was invited by a young curator in Switzerland to do another one of these experimental shows. And I realized with all this, the Morse code, the simple, we haven't seen a lot of my paintings, but the simple movements of the the cross and the dash and the square, I was kind of bumping into a lot of textile references and the idea of stitching and tile. And I was always interested in the Middle Eastern everything. But the guy offered me, said, whatever you want to do. I said, well, I'd like to do a series of paintings based on historical models. I've never done that. I usually bump into history as the painting gets more and more developed. Why not choose as a goal a theme right off the bat? So I'm going to just show you 11 paintings in succession. Okay. So this was, and by the way, what was so exciting about it is the interpretive part, is finding a solution, and I'd like to connect this to our show in general, finding solutions to making a relationship with history. It's like I'm much more interested in my relationship with history than making something particularly new, which I think is kind of impossible. So minimalism. My European ABEX. Those would be Gottlieb Meek's informational sign. Adolf Gottlieb. This would be my French color surrealist painting. Russian icon, that's pretty obvious, right? Tibetan mandala, which is definitely my wheelhouse there. That's my Liechtenstein pop meets Nicholas Krushnik. That's my Seurat drawing kind of thing. That's done with silver, which you can't appreciate here. It kind of shines. That's my pre-Columbian, Peruvian, psychedelic.
Ayahuasca journey.
No, burial blanket, organic colors. This is my 3D photo offset. And this is my classic antique Chinese, like lacquer, Zanzibar red kind of stuff.
So going back to the archive, this is another project with Oakland Museum, and they invited me to work with their archives for Day of the Dead for their 20th anniversary. And I was amazed at how their archive was all just 8.5 by 11 pieces of paper in black binders for this incredibly colorful ritual. And so I wanted to bring back that color and expose the archives that way. So I made dioramas out of their slides. I digitized their slides and printed them and made a diorama of a 20-year history, sort of literally a platform, and conceptually a platform too, to show 20 years of inside the gallery, 20 years of community celebration that they had. And then on the top is an ofrenda for my recently deceased dad. And then you see the phones there, and you could listen to interviews with 8 of the stakeholders from the 20-year history. So curators and docents and community members. There were really amazing stories, and then there are archival objects inside the drawers. And it's kind of really seminal work for me, which I will end with, is a project called Mapping the Archive, where, see all these pieces of paper here are part of my collection that I've had of every art show I've ever been to in my life. And I sort of brought that out as a starting point for this fellowship at the De Young Museum, where they said, again, do whatever you want. And I wanted to look at the history of art in the Bay Area and what made it special. And I noticed that really this tendency towards post-studio practice was something that was really unique to the Bay Area. And I wanted to look at what was that history, what were the social, economic, educational, what was all the support system that got us here, and how is that history and all of this culture being archived? So there was a timeline and archival materials and speakers. It was a really intense, big project. So the timeline is kind of ordered in vertically and horizontally through the ages and vertically through the different subject matters. And there's also an accompanying website for it called mappingthearchive.com. So you can look at that history and also look how it's changing. One of the most important rows was migration and displacement, which is a huge issue in the Bay Area and lots of places, but especially in the Bay Area. And how is this culture being lost through people getting evicted? I think that you can look on that. I could talk about this project for an hour, so I'll leave you there. But Look that up.
Did you say participation? No, I'm joking because this is my last installation this summer at a really small place in just in Italy, across from near the Mediterranean, in Nice. A friend of mine bought a bunker. It's an Italian World War II bunker, and he restored it. You can see some lines, and you can see some geometry that you might see tonight, and some progressions. But it was also, I thought of a place that Mussolini might come and address the troops. So I came up with this theme of a bleachers that were non-bleachers, that they couldn't sit anyone, and I just delineated the bleachers where something grand in a not so grand space. And then this is just a recent. So that's it. Here's a recent painting, just to, again, a more process oriented, low key, a lot of detail. Yeah, so that's it.
I feel like we're ending in a more similar aesthetic here. What's happened? So thanks for bearing with that. That's a lot. We have a lot of stuff to talk about because we've now lived a long time and made a lot of things. But we'd like to invite our family members up to harass us a little bit. Tim Walsh, Brendan Walsh, and Bridget Walsh, would you please come up? Thanks for coming out.
Great to be here. Yeah, great to be here.
So you see how Dan analyzes those paintings. Unfortunately, as he got better with his artwork, his golf game has gone down. He's too analytical with his game now. When he studies those putts and he gives that look like he's looking at those paintings. He was the best golfer at one time in our family, and now every time we play, we have bets whether he can break 100 or 90. And he always talks a good game before he starts. And he's very disappointed at the end. We love
The trade-offs, they're tough, those decisions, I tell you.
There's nothing better than when we go out, and golf is a big part of our life. Our dad was an unbelievable golfer and all taught us the game. Lex played in her day. She used to be in the 4-hole group called the Popsicle Group. And when we played golf, we went out and played 4 holes and had a popsicle afterwards. We love the ribbing of one another when we play golf. My father was a master at it, and he passed it along to us. So when we go out and play, we have a lot of fun. Steve is our nephew there, play with us as well.
Trash talk.
He's been involved in that.
And the one time I played golf in the last 40 years, Dad crucified me because I made us lose. It's like, gosh sakes, how can you be related to me? You're not my daughter. Just hit it as hard as you can.
So I'm curious, does the good-natured ribbing carry over to the art as well with you two? I noticed a little bit of.
Well, to be an artist, you have to be thick-skinned.
No joke,
I guess I could generalize that statement.
Yeah.
And you have to keep going. I tried to mention that early on. The work ethic is, the ribbing. I don't. As you get older, you might be more thick-skinned, but you become sensitive. If you have a whole body of work behind you and someone judges your whole life, like everyone's life, it can hurt pretty bad,
But you are putting yourself out there to be judged more than anybody, so.
How do you handle now with all the reviews online and things of that nature? Like, Dan, I remember reading some stuff where you had some really positive reviews and then some negative reviews. Do you read all that stuff, and how does it affect you?
Yeah, I do, and of course you say, "Oh, I didn't like that magazine" when it's negative, and then when it's a good one, you're like, "Oh, yeah, I do respect that writer." You just no. But the main thing is you're on a total learning curve. You say, "Look, whoever says what, it's an input into your equation." I always talk about artists have to learn how to be good editors of themselves and see themselves well. There's plenty of good ideas that are projected out into the world, but can you realize that? And do other people agree with, I think I'm a minimalist, and someone else says, oh, that looks Baroque. Yeah, and you got to, something's not right. Yeah, you learn from the critics too. So it's a fine blend of fine mixture.
Yeah, and half the battle is how you perceive yourself and present yourself.
So speaking of that, the topic of participation came up a little bit, and if you read about the show, it talks about participation. I chatted with Dan last night, and he talked about participation. Your participation is really obvious, and I would even say a lot of it is your own participation, as much as the viewer, or as much as the other participant, right? Dan, how do you Lexa was giving you a hard time there about participation. I'm just kind of curious how you kind of see the viewer participating with your stuff, and how does that kind of map to what's upstairs?
I was hoping that I was dropping a few clues tonight with the presentation. Is that I'm trying to develop some form that is interactive, that is user friendly. So I'm inviting participation, like the Tibetan mandala, that is for young students of Buddhism to realize Buddha or help realize Buddha and the complexities of Buddha. It's a learning tool. So I think of a participation as I'm making the vehicle, like these structures upstairs in a way are offering participation. Like we are joking, is I'm making the structures to offer participation. She's actually participating.
Like your participation has always been, I mean, even when you were young, your participation has always been a more solitary endeavor, whereas Lexa's has always been more about getting the group together. And I think that that's still true. And even looking at what you've done upstairs, which is breathtaking to me, your stamp on it is different from your stamp on it.
Right.
But neither of us would have come up with this project had we not done it together. There's
Right.
so much stuff that isn't revealed that is just this synthesis of so many meetings and also failures and, you know, having to reroute things thanks to the building inspector and you know, I mean, so I think that there are things that look obvious, but I think that none of that could have happened without us doing it together.
Yeah.
Well, touching on Tina's questions, which I wish I had all three in front of me right now, is that we could have made a platform for us to really have it out, but it turned out that both sides now, us having it out or us disagreeing and how it developed, I think it exists a little more on a subtle plane. We proposed it early on to be a lot more loud. Looking at it on a personal level, this show, it turned out to be what was so meaningful, besides we're so happy about what is manifest here, but is our journey and the learning and the problem solving and the getting together. We'd have meetings every month or two and tossing around ideas and coming up with new forms. To me, that's what most of art is about, is the journey as opposed to the finished product. But in the beginning, we were talking we were talking about having it out on a much more abrasive, what do you call it?
Platform.
Yeah, platform fireworks, but it didn't exactly, we just started to. We were communicating well, I guess. We expected more fights. I don't know.
Were you expecting that to come out in the end product?
It was one of our big proposals, yeah. Not that I would hate her or she would hate me. But.
No, but just, but I think that is revealed, like the Stitch Sampler Room is really the revelation of our differences in our process. That's like kind of there for you to analyze, whereas the work itself is kind of the sort of magic synthesis that not accidentally happened, but through that journey happened.
But even the juxtaposition of the structures versus what's inside of them is very revelatory to me, about which hand you each played.
It's not like we both had the same skill set and we had to fight over. It's so clear that I'm the guy that's been in the construction business. I know the materials. Why don't I be responsible for them not falling down and building them? And of course, Lexa and I talked about how they ought to look, but I was certainly the guy to be building the stuff, And Lexa was certainly more of someone who would understand the narratives of history a little bit better, and she was certainly the one to be managing, although I had much input into that, managing what would be chosen, what would be next to each other, and look into those narratives and relationships and do the research.
And was there a lot of conflict within the museum about what you were and were not allowed to?
I've never had a museum say yes to me so many times. I think that we probably gave Diana a few heart attacks in there, but
Oh yeah.
But yeah, sure, there was skepticism, but they said yes to 99% of it. So
And how much changed from the construction portion from Long Island to what you had built, and once you got here, how much did you have to change?
It's not so much change as how much, what was worth to build in the studio and take apart and take up there. So my idea was always, how can I collapse the time of installation? What should I buy? What's worth cutting now, or cutting on site? A typical job situation where you wouldn't dare cut a piece of wood where you're not sure exactly about the measurement. But for instance, the copper step cone, that was able to be built beforehand and taken apart and then put together again. It's just a matter of what is practical to be able to assemble, cut, make, assemble, and take apart. And is it too big? Things like this. Can you break it down? Some things are not worth building beforehand. You just bring the parts in and so on.
and there were also 7 other people helping us install. So.
Had you done work with copper before?
Only a little bit of sweating of plumbing, but there's no doubt that it's a beautiful.
It's gorgeous.
In electricity, copper runs. Yeah. It runs through copper. So
I came up to the top of those stairs. My jaw just dropped. It was so gorgeous.
I don't know if a lot of you know, but Dan, as he was growing as an artist, as a starving artist in New York, he was a master electrician and a carpenter.
not a master, but yeah,
Yeah, but he's pretty darn good.
I made some money.
But we never thought, I personally and a number of us never thought you would last in New York.
Feels confident.
Not that you would be successful, but that your temperament wasn't suited to New York, and how would you survive there? And I remember seeing you when you were at PCA, and I went to visit you one winter, and you were in this little tiny studio apartment with 3 other guys huddled around, all with your hats and coats on, huddled around this little tiny heater.
A kerosene heater, by the way.
Yeah, kerosene heater with no ventilation.
Yeah.
With nothing. And it just.
Well, the school was. I felt, Lex. I don't know about your. That's right. You went to master's, got your master's much later. But I just thought it'd be wimpy if I didn't go to New York. So I used the MFA as a way of going up there. Okay, I saw it. I'll go back. And of course, you realize you can make some money up there. Mm. So the construction business was staring you right in the face, especially in the early '80s when things were starting to come back. And then I can't even afford to leave. I'm in this cycle, the rat in the cage, running around paying credit card bills. But don't forget that it was only by the time I was 30 that I got my first group show.
Was that with Paula?
No, that would have been around 34, 35. So in other words, that was a whole. But where else would I have gone? I guess I could have moved back to Philly. Yeah.
Different scale there.
But yeah, there's not Lexa and Buck are the only other Walshes who lived in New York, at least for a time. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So Mom talked a little bit about some differences, obviously, when you were younger. But if you guys think about your art experience, and do you guys look back at anything in particular that really led you down one path and led you down another? Obviously many things, but are there any sort of seminal moments for you that you kind of think back? Because you've obviously taken very different paths. I still don't see quite how they come together, but I see it upstairs really clearly. But I'm just kind of curious if you guys have a view on that.
I think growing up Catholic, even though I'm not a Catholic now, but growing up Catholic and having the idea of doing service work is very influential on me.
How about that? Was an art teacher at Harrington High School where we went to?
Bill Latina.
Yeah. Did he have a big impact too?
Totally. So I went to Catholic high school up until 11th grade, and then I convinced my parents that I wouldn't get into art school unless I moved to the public school. And because at Catholic school, all you did was make Mother's Day cards and a couple of still lifes. And there's this kind of rad guy named Bill Latina who invented this thing called IFLs, instinctively felt lines, and he made a spaz out line and then turned it into an abstract painting. And it definitely helped me get into art school. So yes, Bill Latino was influential
Well,
as opposed to the art nun.
be it Catholic or be it any kind of religious thing, the idea of for me, what influenced me, only in retrospect I can say this, is the idea of the kind of a I like the word symbolic exchange, that something meaningful happens when you look at a work. I'm into mandalas and icons and stuff like this. The fact that we were 8 years old and actually believed, and we prayed, and we went through the whole religious, to know what that is, and I don't know, it stuck with me. I'm not exactly, I don't know what I am. I guess I'm an atheist, but people call me a Buddhist, whatever. But the meaning, the exchange between one person and another, I want my paintings to have that kind of relationship. But overall, it's when you're an artist, you're forever trying to find what's right, what feels right, and where you feel the smartest, and you can make the best. So sensibility is a word that I always think of as, it takes years to find. Everyone says, "Oh, you're good at this, you're good at that," but sensibility, finding your sweet spot and where you can really express yourself, and there's not so many obstacles in the way. Like clearly, Lexa has found her sweet spot in participation and communication and so forth and so on.
But do you feel the same way about your own projects and pieces as you hope other people will feel? I mean, obviously, you can't be entirely objective about it, but I mean, do you ever have a time when you look at one of your paintings or one of your projects and have that sort of visceral communion with the experience and the kind of the response?
I have that experience if I often work as a facilitator, and if the project just has legs and the participants in it take it on themselves and take ownership of it, and I could walk away and it would still happen, that's that moment for me.
Do you have that in your work? Do you have stuff where you don't participate? Is there a part where you're not a participant in it once it's done?
Sometimes I'm a facilitator instead of a participant, and those words, are like kind of wishy-washy, depends on the situation.
So I would say Dan is not a participant once he's done. It's all up to the
Your early stuff, like where you showed that styrofoam.
Yeah.
So that all into that category.
I just wonder, I'm thinking about how important that is for you to be,
It's very,
personally involved throughout
it's very,
the viewer's experience or the participant.
yeah.
Yeah, and I'd be early when I'm done with the
you're
painting.
out.
That would be more of a model of what Lexa's doing in a totally abstract form. I mean, that's what we've been talking about all the last few weeks.
Yeah, right.
And it's hard to know how much your placement in the family played into all of this. I mean, you were number 10, but you were in a group of boys. Lexa was number 15, and the next closest girl to her was 7 years away, so, and you really had to scrap, you had to be a scrapper to get noticed and to get response and reaction.
Sorry. I think that we should let everybody go upstairs.
Yeah.
Me too.
Sorry, this has been fun, but.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody, for paying attention.